On May 1st, 2011, in Umoja Estate in Nairobi, what began as a quiet Labor Day Sunday morning would end in one of the most shocking ways. That day, Moses Dola Otieno, a respected investigative journalist, killed his wife Sarah Wambui Kabiro, another journalist and prominent television presenter who at the time was working with NTV. This is the tragic story of how a moment of anger destroyed two successful careers, ended one life, and shattered a young family forever. Welcome back to the Crime Gist. My name is Damisa. Moses Dola Otieno was born in October of 1982. From a very young age, he showed keen interest in storytelling and current affairs. Moses was driven by an insatiable curiosity about the world around him. This curiosity would eventually lead him to pursue journalism as a career. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, he was part of a generation that would come to define modern Kenyan journalism. During those years, media opportunities were expanding, television was becoming more widespread, radio was evolving, and print media was becoming more professional. This created opportunities for young, ambitious journalists who are willing to work hard and had the skills to succeed. Moses Dola majored in journalism, and when he got into the workforce, he focused on investigative journalism and photography. Investigative journalism wasn't for the faint-hearted. It required courage, persistence, and the ability to navigate complex political and social issues. Moses Dola proved to have all these qualities. He was known for his methodical approach to corruption exposés and government accountability stories. Moses Dola ended up working for several prominent media houses, this including Kenya News Agency, the Star newspaper, NTV, Citizen TV, and later Radio Africa. He possessed the charisma and intelligence that made him a standout journalist. This charisma and intelligence were probably what drew a fellow journalist and the woman who would later become his wife to him. Sarah Wambui Kabiro was a lady who embodied grace and intelligence. She was born on Christmas Day, that is December 25, 1983, in Subukia, Nakuru County. She was, however, raised in Nyali, Mombasa County, when her family moved there while she was still young. In the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, women in journalism were still fighting for recognition and respect in what was largely considered a man's field. But Sarah Wambui was never one to be deterred by challenges. She genuinely believed in the power of media to inform and educate. This passion would eventually lead her to pursuing journalism and eventually getting employed in some of Kenya's biggest media houses. Moses Dola and Sarah Wambui Kabiro were both at the peak of their careers when their personal and professional lives intersected around the year 2007. At the time, Sarah Wambui was a television journalist at NTV, one of Kenya's leading stations under the Nation Media Group. Moses Dola, on the other hand, had just joined the Nation Media Group after leaving the Star newspaper. It was in this professional environment at the Nation Media Group that Moses Dola and Sarah Wambui first encountered each other. They first met when they both attended a 4-day team building work event. Their relationship soon developed from professional respect to close friendship, then to a romantic involvement. The couple soon married and settled in Umoja Estate, creating what appeared to be an ideal middle-class life. Friends from that time remember them as a couple who seemed well-matched. Both intelligent, both ambitious, both committed to their careers, but also clearly committed to each other. Their marriage seemed to balance dual career demands successfully, with mutual understanding of professional pressures that came with television, broadcasting, and journalism. However, in the same breath, their marriage had to accommodate the irregular schedules and high-pressure demands of their careers. There were many moments of stress, deadline pressures, and work conflicts. The couple was blessed with a son in the year 2009, and like many successful professionals, They now had to balance demanding careers with the responsibilities of raising a kid. But despite these challenges, from the outside, Moses and Sarah seemed to be managing parenthood alongside their careers successfully. By 2011, the media industry in Kenya was becoming increasingly competitive, which meant that pressure on journalists and reporters was intense. You had to be professional, engaging, and always on top of your game. By then, Moses Dola had moved from NTV to other media houses. And then it happened that in the midst of all the pressure, Moses Dola lost his job. Now, losing a job is tough for anyone. But for someone like Moses Dola, whose entire identity was tied to his career, this was devastating. He decided to go freelance in his journalism, but the transition wasn't smooth. Sarah soon started noticing changes in her husband. He became irritable. He was under a lot of stress and would even start making threats when he was angry. Sarah was so concerned by his behavior that she confided in her mother. Her mother's advice: pack up and leave until Moses Dola figures himself out. But Sarah stayed, presumably for the sake of their young son, or maybe she believed she could help him through this difficult time. Whatever the reason was, that decision to stay with him would cost her everything when soon enough, things started to boil over. Sunday, May 1st, 2011, Labor Day, started like any other Sunday morning in the Dola household. At around 7:30 a.m., while Sarah was sleeping, Moses Dola woke up and decided to play some loud music on their music system. This is where the first crack in what should have been a peaceful morning appeared. The music woke Sarah up, and understandably, she was not pleased with the volume of the music. So, she made it clear that she wanted the music turned down as she wanted to sleep in that Sunday morning. She just needed a relaxing morning and simply found the volume inconsiderate. In millions of homes around the world, this kind of minor domestic disagreement would get resolved without incident. A spouse asks for the music to be turned down, the other spouse complies, or they negotiate a compromise and life goes on. But on this particular morning, in this particular house, something went terribly wrong. Instead of turning down the music or discussing the issue calmly, Moses refused to turn down the volume, and Sarah became even more upset. She eventually got up and went to unplug the music system herself. This action triggered something in Dola. Instead of seeing it as his wife simply wanting peace in their home, he interpreted it as a confrontation. So guess what he did? He plugged the music system back in and turned the volume up even higher. Right there, the situation began to escalate. Sarah started complaining about what he had done, saying she needed some quiet time to sleep. Moses would later describe feeling that Sarah had quote-unquote other issues, suggesting that he perceived the music complaint as being about something deeper than just volume levels. According to Moses Dola's own account, and remember, he was the only witness to what happened, as he turned to leave the room, Sarah grabbed a pair of scissors and threatened to stab him with it. He turned back to take them from her. Dola said that he managed to take the scissors and throw them on the bed. However, Sarah was relentless. She tried to reach for the scissors again, but this time he pushed her back, causing her to hit her head on the edge of the bed. According to him, as he started to leave the room, he heard what would be his wife's last words, which were said in Swahili, "Ona umeniumiza," which means, "See, you have hurt me." But he left the room anyway, unaware that her injury was life-threatening. He returned home at around noon to find Sarah in the same spot he had left her. He shook her, trying to wake her up, and, according to him, collapsed on finding out that she was dead. When he came to, he was faced with the horrible reality that his wife was normal and he was responsible. The realization of what he had done hit him immediately. But instead of calling for help, Moses Dola made a series of choices that suggest that he was either in complete denial about what had happened or was attempting to cover up his crime. He left his dead wife in the home and ran. He took a matatu bound for Nakuru. This was after calling Sarah's mom and dad and informing them that their daughter was dead. When the police were finally notified and arrived at the scene, they found clear evidence that this was a case of domestic violence. They immediately began treating it as a homicide and looking for Moses Dola, the primary suspect. But Moses wasn't there to be arrested. He had already gone into hiding. And this decision to go into hiding after killing his wife turned him into a fugitive. Over the next few days, while Sarah's family grieved and the media covered the shocking story of one of their own being murdered, reality began to set in for Moses. It may have been the stress of being constantly on the run, or the realization that he couldn't hide forever, or perhaps some remaining sense of responsibility for what he had done. But Moses made the decision to surrender himself to the authorities. On 4th May 2011, Moses Dola walked into Naivasha police station and turned himself in. He was arrested and taken back to Nairobi, where he was later charged with the offense of murder. And just like that, the successful journalist who had once held powerful people accountable was now the one in handcuffs. For colleagues who had worked with Moses Dola, it was probably difficult to reconcile the professional journalist they knew with the man who now stood accused of murder. After his initial arrest and processing, Moses Dola spent 23 months in jail before his trial even began. Nearly 2 years of his life spent in custody while lawyers prepared arguments. When his trial began years later in 2013, the prosecution presented strong evidence. Moses Dola was the only other person present when Sarah Wambui died. Also, his behavior after Sarah Wambui's death was inconsistent with innocence. The decision to hide suggested consciousness of guilt. Medical records and testimony also detailed exactly how Sarah died and confirmed that Moses Dola's actions directly caused her death. The defense that Moses ultimately pursued was that the death resulted from a domestic altercation that escalated beyond what he intended. He acknowledged that, yes, his actions directly caused Wambui's death, but he also tried to convince the court that he hadn't intended to kill her, that this was a tragic accident rather than premeditated murder. The couple had argued about loud music. The argument became physical, and in the heat of the moment, in what was probably seconds of poor judgment, Moses committed an act that unintentionally killed his wife. He then left her on the bed and walked out of the room. Moses told the court that he regretted leaving Wambui hurt, saying that had he not walked away or had he come back earlier, perhaps he would have taken her to the hospital and she might have survived. Moses Dola's defense emphasized on his lack of prior criminal history and his previously stable relationship with Sarah Wambui. He argued that he was a man whose actions that fateful morning didn't represent his true nature. This was just a situation that escalated rapidly rather than premeditated murder. And Dola was able to convince the court on this. Eventually, the murder charge was brought down to manslaughter. The court ruled that while Sarah Wambui died from a domestic altercation, there was no evidence of premeditated murder. On November 29, 2018, Moses Dola was sentenced to 10 years behind bars after pleading guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter in a plea bargain. During his incarceration, as part of his personal transformation journey, Dola decided to pursue legal studies. He helped other inmates with their cases and was described as an outstanding and well-behaved inmate. In December 2022, Honorable Chief Justice Martha Koome made a directive which called for the review of criminal cases in a bid to alleviate overcrowding in the country's prisons and to facilitate the rehabilitation of offenders. Dola believed that he deserved to be considered for this opportunity. In October 2024, he filed an urgent application seeking his release from Committee Maximum Security Prison. In his plea, he expressed deep remorse for his actions, emphasizing his regret and personal transformation. He also highlighted the steps he had taken toward rehabilitation during his incarceration, including pursuing legal training. The judge, considering his application, noted that Moses Dola had spent a crucial portion of his youth in prison. He went into prison at the age of 29 and will be turning 43 in October 2025. Their son had suffered the greatest long-term impact growing up without his parents. Although he had been well taken care of by Sarah's family, the judge said that he hoped that Dola would make amends with him. After serving a total of 6 years and 4 months since his conviction, Moses Dola was released in March 2025. Since his release, he has spoken openly about his past and on how he wants to utilize his newly found freedom. He is determined to become an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, and his ultimate goal is to one day become the president of the Law Society of Kenya. He is also now an advocate against gender-based violence. The Moses Dola case represents one of the worst case scenarios that can emerge as a consequence of domestic violence. But perhaps the most tragic fact is that this particular outcome was completely preventable. A domestic argument over the volume of music should never have escalated to lethal violence when better conflict resolution could have saved Sarah's life. There is need for better domestic violence prevention mechanisms, anger management resources, and support systems that can help prevent such tragedies before they happen. Better communication methods should also be fostered in homes rather than resulting to violence that, like in our case today, would end up fatally. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, remember that help is available. That brings us to the end of today's episode. As usual, please do not forget to subscribe, to like, and to share this episode with other true crime junkies like yourself. See you right here on the next one.